What is the best tip someone can do to set themselves up for financial success?
Where I'm spending my money, am I getting joy from that? Am I deriving value from it?
They don't know what to do with their money. Some people just park it in a bank, which is just setting yourself up for
So I
failure.
think there has to be a happy medium. You don't want to save everything, like you said, for later on, but you also don't want to spend everything today.
People lean heavily on credit cards in America today. Talk about some common credit card myths.
We see people sometimes not paying them off in full because they think it's going to hinder their score if they pay them off. And that's completely false. There is no benefit whatsoever. No benefit to you.
Well, welcome. We are back for another episode. Glad you guys are here and have some questions I wanted to start with today. Are you financially prepared? Do you understand money? And do you manage it effectively? Our guest today is a best-selling author who can help us answer these questions. He's a certified financial planner and host of the MIltin Money Mindset podcast. Please welcome Larry Sprung. Larry, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we had some scheduling stuff we had to coordinate. You're on the go, man. You're in demand. So I'm glad we finally nailed down a time to chat. And as I said in my email to you before, it's a good thing to be in demand. So seems like you're a mover and shaker.
No moss grows under me, Mike. That's for sure. So
That's good.
It wouldn't have a chance, for sure.
So I want to start with an area you specialize in, and we'll dive into some different things. But what is the best tip someone can do to set themselves up for financial success?
Start early. I can't impress upon people that enough. Starting early is such a powerful tool and allows people to get a leg up. And, early is all relative, right? So if you're listening to this and you're in your 20s, start now. If you're in your teens and you have W-2 wages, start now. If you're listening to this and you're in your 40s and 50s, start now. And, as early as you possibly can. And, I think it goes by the old adage, right? An oak tree, it was best to plant the seed 20 years ago. But if you didn't have that opportunity, then you start today and look for those opportunities 20 years from now. But if you don't have it, start it and get it in place.
Yeah, and I think people just get intimidated by where to start. And obviously that's where somebody like you comes in. People have no knowledge of this. They don't know what to do with their money. Some people just park it in a bank, which is just setting yourself up for failure, ultimately with inflation and all the different things we're dealing with in today's economy. But obviously they need somebody like you to get direction if they're not clear on how to proceed.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think it's one of those things that's difficult to venture down those topics. We don't do enough to educate people on the importance of this and how to properly approach it, which that's a problem in itself. And then I think there's inherently a problem within within my profession as well. And that is, there's this tendency to focus on the numbers and the numbers alone. And it can be intimidating. And, I was having a conversation with somebody the other day who was talking about going to see an advisor, and they started talking about their budget, and it turned into like this budget shaming situation where it was like, hey, looking at this, you're spending too much money for this or spending too much money for that. And, my approach is a lot different than that. I will never do that. It's not my job to tell you what you should or shouldn't be spending money on, but we help guide families to take a look at their budget and say, hey, where I'm spending my money, am I getting joy from that? Am I deriving value from it? And it's, helping my life and adding value to my life. Because if it is, then, probably want to leave it. If you're not getting any joy from it, then think about a way to cut it out. Maybe you don't need it at all. And then, from there, start looking at those joyful areas where you are spending and take a look at them, put them under a microscope and say, hey, am I overspending, underspending in these areas? And then create the budget accordingly. And, it shouldn't be this budget shaming exercise, which we see happens very often, which also intimidates people from seeking advice and guidance.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to be said for quality of life. And you have to enjoy your life. You can't just be obsessed with numbers. And I've been guilty of that. My wife can attest to that. I get obsessed with numbers, and I'll scale back on things I enjoy, sacrifice some fun now for later. And sometimes she has to remind me, well, you're living today. So I mean, if you're not promised tomorrow,
Hmm.
so you have to kind of split the difference. That's a challenge for some people.
Yeah, and I think that you're definitely right, and I think that it's very good that you have your wife to help moderate that a little bit. I'm in a
Yeah,
similar situation. I tend to be a numbers guy, not
yeah,
really a spender necessarily, and my wife helps me in those areas as well. So it's good to have those dynamics. And, the reason why I feel very strongly about the way I do is, growing up and, seeing my parents, my mom passed away at the age of 47. So, looking at that and, her and my dad saving for retirement, right, which
mhm,
was sometime well off in the future, looking at that, she didn't have the ability to enjoy what was going to come in
yeah,
retirement. So, had she sacrificed everything for some time later on, she wouldn't have been able to enjoy life along the way. And I
right.
don't think that that is how people should or want to live. So I think there has to be a happy medium. You don't want to save everything, like you said, for later on, but you also don't want to spend everything today in case you are lucky enough to have that longevity. So you have to find that happy medium where you get the joy today and also set yourself up for a joyful life in the future as well.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And my thing is, and you're totally right. And my struggle is, listen, if I drop dead tomorrow, I don't want you to have to work another day.
Right.
And so it's a constant wrestling for me. And I know there's different ways to tackle that scenario, things like life insurance and things along those lines. But yeah, it's something I definitely have to work on. Another thing I wanted to ask you was credit cards. People lean heavily on credit cards in America today. Talk about some common credit card myths.
Oh, I mean, there are plenty of them. I want to say, credit cards are not bad, and credit is not something that's bad. It's a tool that you have to educate yourself and learn how to use it properly, use them properly. I think one of the biggest myths are along the lines of I need to keep a balance on my credit card because that actually helps my credit score. So we see people sometimes not paying them off in full because they think it's going to hinder their score if they pay them off. And that's completely false. There is no benefit whatsoever. No benefit to you. There's a huge benefit to the credit card issuer for you keeping that balance, and it's just not true. You are valued upon your usage, your ability to pay. So don't be keeping balances because you think that there is some benefit to doing that. There's really not. You're actually doing yourself more harm than good. I think that another myth is I shouldn't pay an annual fee for my credit card. And, depending on how you look at it, that may very well be true. But at the same time, you have to look at what benefits you're deriving. I have a couple of cards that I do pay an annual fee for, but I derive well in excess of that annual fee in benefits, whether it be, getting credit back on Uber rides, credit towards airline, juicing up the amount of airline miles I get. I'm usually well in excess of that fee. So, I mean, those are two that come really, top of mind that I hear a lot about, very much so the keeping the balances on. But,
Yeah.
I think it's important to everybody, and part of that starting early kind of venture that I spoke about earlier is learning and understanding how credit works and how to use it appropriately. The best way is use the credit card, pay it off at the end of the month, get the benefits of the points, no interest to the credit card issuer, and that puts you in the, best possible light.
Yeah, there's something to be said for those credit card points. I got one card that helps me basically almost fund a whole vacation once a year with the amount of points I get back on it. And It's just a matter of being able to assess whether somebody pays that fee and then they get back enough based on what that, based on the rewards they get,
Hmm.
like you said. So that's definitely true, and it's a good point. So we've got a lot of market volatility today. We're in a weird time in the markets, I think. You might agree with me. The election things kind of shot up. We're sort of up and down. We're dealing with pretty long-term inflation right now. What are your thoughts on just dealing with the volatility when people are trying to make investment decisions? And I'm not asking for flat out advice, obviously, here for
Yeah.
people that are listening or watching, but what do people need to consider in a time in this market when they're managing investments and money and what they should do with it?
Yeah, I think you got to be very careful because making the wrong move or not doing anything could be, more harmful than good in the long run. We had seen, and I've, just in my circles, there were people that have sat on the sidelines for the last 4 years, based upon political wranglings that they felt it wasn't going to be a good environment. And had you done that, you missed out on a great opportunity because the markets have moved up significantly over that period of time. So to your point, I think at any point in time, and I've been in this profession for 27, 28 years at this point. So I've been through a number of these market cycles. I was through the 2008 market crash, long-term capital in 1997, tech boom and bust. So I've seen a lot of these, and what I would say to you and your listeners and your viewers are that, at any period of time, today is no different. There's always some measure of volatility, and there's
Yeah.
always something going on in the world, the environment around you, that is going to be a driver for you to do nothing or to provide fear. So what you have to do is you have to mitigate and meet out as much of that as you possibly can. And the way you do that is you build and you develop a financial plan for you and your family, one that's centered around, creating a joyful life for yourself and creating that plan and then having your investments positioned in a way that's going to serve that plan and your life. And, you have to understand that most people, although they talk about investing, they have a mindset of being a trader. And, if you're a trader, you're worried about what's going on today because you might buy something this morning and sell it this afternoon. And that's your mindset. But if you really want to be an investor, then you have to have a completely different mindset, understand what your long range goals, objectives, and risk profile are, and design a portfolio that's going to be able to withstand the test of time. And I'm not saying you just simply, build it today and set it and forget it and never look at it for 10 or 20 years. You certainly can do that and it probably would work out okay. But you
Mhm.
want to at least take a look at it. There might be minor tweaks from time to time that could help put you in a better position, mitigate risk. And that's what you look for. You look for those opportunities to mitigate and prevent risk from happening. And sometimes those minor adjustments can lead to major improvements. So, looking at what we've done for families, in the last several years, we've had, once in a lifetime pandemic, inflation that went to an all-time, high,
Mhm.
interest rates that went to a 20 plus year high. For the most part, allocations have stayed somewhat similar. We've made some shifts along the way just because of interest rates and fixed income. But at the end of the day, the driver of changes to portfolios are not what you're reading about in the news or hearing about online. It's really what has changed in the family's life. And those are the biggest drivers of change in portfolios, not necessarily who's going to be the president for the next 4 years or how that's going to shake out. Because, I mean, the empirical evidence shows that it doesn't really matter, Democrat or Republican. Markets on average go higher every year. It doesn't really matter who ultimately ends up in office.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. And for those who try to self-direct their portfolios, it can be such a sea of different opinions when you start looking through like the market analysts and what they think on one particular stock or an ETF. you'll get an even split often where, half of them are like buy, dump it. The other ones are like sell, hold. It's just so hard to make sense of that. So it can be helpful if somebody wants to get more formal advice from somebody like yourself if they're not able to weather that nonsense. Because a lot of it's like hype and smoke and mirrors depending on the stock. You got these meme stocks out there that are so popular and then they tank, 30, 40 points the next day. It's just a sea of information. It's hard for people to navigate sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, two things I would say to that is one, you have to understand where what the underlying motivator for that recommendation is sometimes, right? If it's a big firm, maybe they're the investment banker for that security or that company. Or if it's somebody on TikTok, maybe they're getting an affiliate revenue from one of the things that they're recommending. And, you have to look at that from that standpoint in terms of where is that information coming from. The other thing I would point out is Vanguard, which is traditionally a company that deals with do-it-yourself or self-directed individuals, did a
Mhm.
study several years ago about the benefits of having a financial advisor. So it was a little bit ironic that a firm that's predominantly self-directed talks about, what are the benefits of having a financial advisor. And without quoting it, because I don't know the exact numbers, but just to give you a guideline, and if you Google Vanguard study, value of having a financial advisor, it will come up. It's not that hard to find it. Basically, having a financial advisor adds the average of about 3% per year on average to your portfolio in terms of return. And the vast majority of that return factor of that 3%, some of it's, making moves tax efficiently. But the biggest component of that is from a behavioral finance standpoint is by having a financial advisor and having them there to help guide you. Typically, they prevent you from making mistakes that you otherwise may have made. You may have heard something on the news or heard from a friend and gone and sold at the wrong
Mhm.
time at the wrong moment. And having that advisor may have prevented you from making that move. And in a lot of cases, that's where a lot of the value gets added. So if you're somebody that gets swayed easily or feel like, hey, I can't deal with the emotional end of things because I feel like I'm going to buy at the wrong time or sell at the wrong time, etc. I really think that there's a lot of inherent value of having an advisor just from that standpoint to help walk and talk you through those, maybe more difficult and challenging times.
Hmm. That's an interesting study, especially coming from Vanguard,
Right.
like you say. So, talk about risk tolerance. How can someone assess their own tolerance for risk when it comes to investing? What are some things they can look at or consider?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. In terms of, we have a tool that we use that's like a 7 or 8 question risk profile that will assess you and kind of put you in this conservative, moderate, or growth ranking, and it's right on our website at MIltinFinancial.com. So if people are curious what those 7 or 8 questions are, they can go there and take that risk profile. And those tools, we're not the only one that has them. There are plenty of tools out there to kind of assess that. And they're usually from a standpoint of, do you need income from these investments right away to gauge whether you need money from it right away, income. What if you had these, if you invested $100,000 and it dropped by this amount, at what point would you feel like you needed to sell? Or if you invested $100,000 and you can pick your returns and it was maximum this, minimum this, which segment would you take? So those are good tools to kind of get a gauge. But again, doing this for as long as I have, I will tell you that's one way of doing it. And that's usually what we use as our starting point with families. But at the end of the day, the real test of risk profile is, what do they do when the market starts going awry? How do they feel about their investments? And I'll share with you, a real story. We had a family, many years ago that when the market was going up significantly, they reached out to me and they said, hey, the S&P is up X. We're up less than that. Why is that? And I explained, well, you're moderate. You're not in line with just the S&P. We have stocks and bonds in there. We don't just have large cap. We also have mid and small, et cetera. Went through the whole explanation with them. And they said, well, I really want to get a higher return. So I said, well, why don't we do this? I said, and I explained that with that risk of the higher return comes the risk of maybe things going down more if things change. So we settled on basically splitting the portfolio, making 50% of it more risky and keeping 50% of it less risky. And over the next several weeks, it didn't even take long, the market started going through one of their correction periods, which is something that happens typically once per year on
Mhm.
average. And they started seeing that account start peeling back. And in a matter of weeks, they were down like $15,000 or $20,000 on like $1 million
Wow.
account, not even a
Yeah.
small amount. But
Mhm.
to them, the 20,000 was a big number. And they called me up and they're like, what's going on here? Why is this happening? I said, well, you wanted to be more aggressive. We did that.
Yeah.
I said, but the market since then has gone the other way. So we've seen the other side. Well, this isn't what I wanted or needed. This isn't what I expected. We got to put it back the way it was because we were able to see how the first half did versus the second half that we changed. And they're like, oh, well, I guess I'm not. I guess I'm not aggressive then. I guess not. So to your question, I think part of it is taking some of these tools and assessments and validating what that risk profile is. But secondarily, over time, it really doesn't matter what that score is. It really matters how you're going to react and feel, as markets change and adjust, and that might change your risk tolerance as well.
Yeah, and people get so emotional about their money, and understandably, if it's their life savings and they want it to grow. Do you ever find that people blame you for what's going on, like the scenario you just gave us? Do people blame you even after you warn them, "Hey, this is an aggressive position. This could fall through the cracks." How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a firm, we do a really good job educating the families that we serve to understand, very distinctly, we don't control the markets. So, like we would all do in business or whatever we do for a living, you can only control those pieces that you can control, and you want to make sure that those are all dialed in appropriately. So, hopefully those things we can't control don't affect things as greatly, right? So they know we can't control the markets, but we can control the allocation, right? We can control other things. So we, as a firm, really try to concentrate with the families that we serve to make sure that when we talk with them and meet with them, that their allocation is in line with where they feel they
Mhm.
should be, that their goals and objectives are in line. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we hope that we can mitigate as much of that volatility as a result. So we don't get faulted for that kind of situation where if the market goes down that it's our fault. But at the end of the day, I think if we weren't doing what we did do and we weren't as proactive, that's where I think a lot of advisors fail because they set up these risk profiles, they have the client's goals, they invest the money, they don't talk to them for 10 years, and then things change and they're freaking out. And, rightfully so, those
Yeah.
clients have a right to be upset because maybe things should have been adjusted over that 10-year period. But we don't have that so much. I mean, perfect example back in August when the markets took a really significant dip that Monday morning. I think it was like the first Monday in August, markets were down like 1,000, 1,400 points. We ended up recuperating it all by the end of the week. I think that day we got one phone call from a family, and that was it. And I think that's just simply a testament to
Yeah, that's good.
the fact that we prepare people, even
Mhm.
like I just had a meeting a little bit ago, right? The family was up 17% year to date. And I, word for word, I said, hey, it's been a great year, but just remember, their benchmark is 7 to 8% per year. That's what their goal is to hit. We're at 17 this year. So I said, just remember, when the market's down at some point, this extra 10% buffer is going to be there to help mitigate that downside when and if the market turns. And it's not a matter of if it will, it will. It's just a matter of when markets, gyrate. It's just going to happen. So we do a really good job just reinforcing that with the families over the years.
Hmm. So tell me about your podcast. I see you got that shirt on, the MIltin Money Mindset. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so we created the show about 4 years ago, and it's been a great ride. I've really enjoyed having the show and speaking with some amazing guests. I would say our show is kind of broken down into three segments or kind of types of guests. We have, entrepreneurs. I am just super fascinated with the entrepreneurial journey. It fascinates me how much they are different, but at the same time very similar in a lot of ways. So I always enjoy hearing those stories and sharing those with our listeners. I'm a big hockey family. My boys currently play, one in college and one in junior hockey. So we're a big hockey family. So we have a lot of sports related guests, whether they're hockey. We've had a few NHL, NFL folks on the show, which I think, looking at athletes, I think they're very similar to entrepreneurs. They're entrepreneurs of their own talent, if you will. So very similar in that regard. And then finally, we also have a lot of mental health professionals. Mental health and mindset is something that is extremely important to me. So we've had everything from, psychologists to the head of the chief medical officer at the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, which I'm involved with. We talk about mindset and mental health, even with the athletes and the entrepreneurs that we have on the show as well.
You talked about entrepreneurs, and they definitely have some distinct traits. Talk about some of the traits that you've seen in the different entrepreneurs you've spoken to, and yourself being one as well. And how are they different?
Yeah, I don't know that they're so it's amazing. Like you have some people that have had like this upbringing in an entrepreneurial family, and it was almost like they were destined to be entrepreneurs, right? And then you have others that, have no track record or history from a family side, and just are first generation entrepreneurs. You have people who were selling lollipops in their elementary school and, brought that up to creating a, 100 plus $1 million company. So I think that, a lot of the traits that I see that are common are, people who don't necessarily want to be embedded in an organization, kind of want to control their own destiny, have this unrelenting desire to be successful, and at the same time have some kind of passion or purpose that they really want to lean into and bring other people with them along for that ride. So there's a lot of commonalities and a lot of threads a lot of times through these stories, but it's always amazing to see even the different, businesses that people create from what they're doing. I mean, most recently, and I don't think this episode is out yet, we had a gentleman who basically quit high school, never finished high school, and created a cannabis business at a very early age, and ended up exiting 20 years later at 400 and something $1 million.
Wow.
It's an amazing story, and now he's just working with other entrepreneurs to help them understand what it took to grow, scale, and exit a business like that. We had the founder of Hydro Flask on, another very well-known company. So there's a lot of common threads. Sometimes there's a lot of non-common threads, a lot of diversion from that. But, each story is more powerful than the next.
Yeah. So you worked for a firm prior to starting your own. You obviously have that entrepreneurial bug. What was the revelation in your own mind that you had to go do this on your own?
Yeah, so I think I was one of those people that it was in my DNA. My grandfather on my mom's side was very entrepreneurial. He was never very successful, had a lot of great ideas, just was really poor at executing them. And even at an early age, I identified that. My dad, he was a New York City school teacher, but he also had a side business. He had his own business. And I remember having a conversation with him, and I talk about this in my book, Financial Planning Made Personal. This story, I worked for him for a summer. He basically packaged fruit and nut and snack mixes and sold it to colleges and local convenience stores, etc. And I said to him, I said, hey, this upcoming summer, why don't you let me go out and sell and increase, the revenue for the business? And he looked at me and he said, Larry, that's a great idea. I'd be happy to do that. But here's the problem and here's the challenge. And that is, when you go back to college, who's going to end up servicing all those new accounts that you bring on over the summer? And he
Yeah.
wasn't really willing and interested in scaling. It was a good side
Mhm.
hustle for him before he had side hustle. So I had a lot of that entrepreneurial stuff in me, and had a newspaper route at a very young age. I would sell people subscriptions and then deliver them. So it was something ingrained in me. So I think when I entered the profession early on, it was something that I always knew that I was going to work to and strive for. And then I was just presented with the opportunity. It was just right in front of me. I was working at a big firm. There was an announced merger of that firm. So I started going into planning mode. And ultimately, what happened was, the day that they wanted my new non solicitation and employment agreement, because of the merged company, I handed in my resignation and launched my firm. So it was
Wow.
something that was always in the back of my mind. I knew it wasn't a matter if, it was a matter of when. And then, it presented itself in probably early 2003, and then I launched in 2004.
Wow. Now, I don't know if your experience was like mine, but I also resigned from a job many, many years ago before I went out on my own. Describe that day. How was that day for you? Because for me, it was extremely empowering.
Yeah.
I had a good relationship with my superior. I had some people in my circle that I had to work around from different departments that didn't like me. And I'm going to go out and say they didn't respect me necessarily. They thought I was just some buffoon. And I'm not saying that I'm not, but they were surprised when I was going out on my own. And they were somewhat shocked. Like, you? Oh, I didn't think you were that type.
Right.
And that felt really good when I gave them my last goodbye. I was cordial, but what was that day like for you? Was that day something memorable, or was it just another day at the office?
It was pretty memorable, and it got more memorable than I thought it was going to be, because what ended up happening was, my media manager, we didn't have a great relationship. One of the best conversations that I remember, and kind of lead me down this path that I think I'm unemployable, was, she came to me and she asked me for my feedback. She said, hey, what can we do to make the team generate more revenue and
Mm,
increase our numbers? And I looked at her and I said, well, that's a great question. I said, but here's the deal. I said, the team does not impact my compensation. Basically, whatever I did, I was compensated for.
mhm,
There was no compensation based upon the team that I was in.
mhm,
So I said, the team really isn't relevant to me, because that doesn't benefit me.
mhm,
So I said, if you're asking me what I can be to be more, drive more revenue and be more contributory to the organization, I said, I counted last month, we had about 40 hours of, meetings, Zoom calls. It was crazy. I was like, just give me that time back. You give me that 40 hours back. Don't have any meetings next month. I will be able to produce more. Hands down, I get a week back.
mhm.
And she looked me in the eye and she said, I knew I shouldn't have asked you. And, that for me. So I went into her office. I had to drive about a half hour away because she was at a different location. I handed in my resignation. And quite frankly, she could care less.
Really?
But here's where the story got interesting. So I hand in my resignation. I drive over to my new office. I get into the office. My cell phone rings. This is non-smartphone day, right? It was flip
Yeah,
phone.
yeah.
Phone goes off. Call. It was my manager's manager. So he called me up, and I was one of the few CFPs in the program, in their line, and he goes, listen, you can't resign. We need you to stick around. And I said, well, I did resign and I'm not sticking around. I'm like, why couldn't I? And he's like, well, I need you to stay here and I'm willing to, talk about what it might take to have you stay. So I said, listen, I said, my mind's made up. I said, but if you come up with X number of dollars, which was high, six figures plus,
Yeah.
I said, maybe I'll think about it. And he said to me on the phone, he goes, there's no way I can pay you that money. And I said, well, it's kind of interesting. I know why you want me to stick around. And he's like, why is that? I go, because you're going to get a retention bonus for every advisor that sticks around in the program. And all I'm asking you to do is pay me my share that you're going to get of my retention
Mm.
bonus. And I'll think about sticking around. And he goes, I can't do that. I said, well, then this is the last conversation we're going to have, and I wish you the best of luck. And that was it. So it
Wow.
actually made me feel really good, made a good
Yeah.
story, stuck with me. And then 2 weeks later, both him and my immediate manager were both let go,
Oh,
and
wow.
that was it.
That sounds like a movie.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
pretty great.
So
That's a lot more memorable than my day.
yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed it. So, had I not gotten that phone call, I don't know how memorable it would have been, but that certainly has stuck with me now 20 plus years later, that conversation. So it was pretty enjoyable.
Yeah, and it sounds like you knew right then and there you made the right move just based on that conversation with him on the phone, I would say.
Oh, I had a year plus to come to resign myself to the fact that I was making the right decision. And quite frankly, even if he met my demand, I don't know that I would have capitulated and asked him for my resignation back. I think I just wanted to hear him say, I kind of in my heart of hearts knew he was going to say no, but I was
Yeah.
like, it'd be nice to hear if he said yes and
Yeah.
then tell him no anyway.
Yeah.
But I kind of knew the direction that this was going to go in from the jump.
That's great. You mentioned you cover some mental health content on your podcast and you deal with suicide prevention. Tell us a little about that. How did you get into that?
Yeah, so unfortunately, from personal experience, lost my brother-in-law, my wife's brother, in 2004, literally about a month before I launched my firm, and almost didn't launch the firm because of that. My wife and I had some conversations around that, and she said, "No, you have to do it. You have to go move forward with it." So we lost him. He was bipolar, and it opened my eyes to really what mental health is, and that what could actually happen from poor mental health, because I don't know that I
Yeah.
knew anybody who passed away or died by suicide prior to that. So it was
Mhm.
really eye-opening, and my wife and I really resigned ourselves to the fact that we weren't going to let him go quietly. And thinking about this was 20 years ago, where mental health was not really spoken about, discussed like it is today. So we wanted to make sure that that conversation was, upfront and talked about and discussed. And we've done that. We've raised collectively in his name, for the Keith Milano Memorial Fund at AFSP. We've raised over $1.7 million
Wow.
for the cause. I sat on the
Mhm.
national board for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention for about 14 years. Ended up coming off the board because I helped implement term limits while I was on the board. So I worked my way out of a board position, but it was
Mhm.
it was fine. They need some new blood, and I still sit on their finance and investment committees, and I'm still heavily involved with the organization. And we do a couple of fundraisers each year, but it's vitally important. And then really, it ties back very well to what we do and how we work with families, because a lot of this, if you think about investing, finances, health, mental health. If we kind of akin it to a three-legged stool. You have your mental health, you have your physical health, and you have your financial health. And if you're not if you're deficient in one of those areas, it really affects the others, and
Yeah.
it could have a detrimental effect. So, we have those conversations with families about, okay, you're looking to retire. What are you going to do with those 40 hours a week, right? How are you going to set yourself up not only financially but mentally and socially for that time that you're looking to get back by not working? So, and a lot of advisors aren't having those conversations. So
Mhm.
we feel comfortable doing that. And I will also say that because of our work in that area, we've had families who've approached us and felt very comfortable about sharing their own struggles or struggles of a child. And we're not mental health professionals, but being that we had to navigate that system, we kind of have become a de facto resource and can help other families kind of navigate if they need specific resources or support.
That's great that you're involved in that. And it seems like young people's and suicide is becoming a worsening issue. What do you think's driving suicide numbers today?
Yeah, I would say this. I mean, the numbers, inherently are definitely higher. I don't know that they're as high, as, have gone up as much as we would be led to believe. And what I mean by that is, and I'm not minimizing anybody who's died by suicide or the problem itself, but what I mean by that is I think we're hearing about it a lot more, right? We're hearing people talk about this. 20 years ago, when my brother-in-law passed away and died by suicide, and people came to his, funeral, people would walk up to us and say, "Yeah, my uncle, he hit a tree." And what they
Mhm.
were saying to us was the uncle drove into a tree, but they wouldn't say it was suicide. Or my uncle had a heart attack, or at least that's what they told the family. And that
Yeah.
was kind of commonplace back then. And I think now people are being a little bit more transparent and having those conversations. So I don't think that, although the numbers have gone up, I think we're hearing about it a lot more, and it hasn't been relational in terms of how much more we're hearing about it with the numbers,
Mhm.
which actually is a good thing, because the more people that are talking about it, talking about their struggles, the more people feel comfortable in finding help and finding solutions. But, listen, the problems could be many. I mean, I think a couple of things that come to mind, quickly are, you know, kids are not being put in a position to be independent in a lot of cases. Some of them are spending an inordinate amount of time online. I think there's a lot of bullying going on, whether it be, the keyboard cowboy or face to face. And I think some of those coping skills have left that younger generations may have. I don't think that those have been built up as much.
Mhm.
I'm sure if you asked a clinician, they probably would have maybe some different ideas about what they feel are these indicators that have led to this.
Yeah.
But I think the good thing is we're hearing about it more, which means that youngsters are feeling more comfortable about talking about it and seeking help, which
Yeah.
I think is vitally important, because we all have challenges mentally at some point in time. I don't think you could talk to an entrepreneur like we were talking about earlier that couldn't say with certainty that they never had any kind of mental strife. Chances are you're going to, but the important thing is, did you seek the help? Did you get the advice and guidance, and did you correct that and get it on the right path? And that's the important piece.
That's great that you're seeing more of an open discussion on that issue now, whereas before people used to bury it. I agree with you that online definitely kids being online so much isn't helping. There are negative aspects to social media, as we're all well aware in the past several years. But it's hard to find that balance because young people just communicate online now. So, like, I've got a teenager in the house that goes out sometimes, hangs out with his friends. As a teen, I was doing that every day. Now they all stay home and jump online. And so I don't want to thwart the social aspects of it, but there's definitely negative aspects to it too. It's a weird balance to try to find because
Yeah.
you want your kids socializing, but you don't want them caught up in the toxicity that comes around in social media and just the bullying, the cyberbullying, like you mentioned. It's a difficult, weird generation that we're in now.
Yeah, I agree. I think our kids are, our youngsters are probably more social than ever. It's just a different, mechanism being social. Social for me was, running out of the house and playing street hockey all day with the other kids on the block. Now being social is, being on Snapchat and having conversations on there. Or, my son went to boarding school in Minnesota, so he was with kids all over the country, if not the world. His roommate was from Russia, his friends from Canada, and now they're all dispersed in different places after they graduated and they're on their own journeys. But you know what? He hops on Xbox and he could be on with 6 or 7 of those people, and it's like they're back at school and they're reconnecting. So that social aspect there, I think it's great. I think where the
Yeah.
challenge is, how do you get from, those young people being social online and in those environments, which are good, and then doing it in person, because that's
Mhm.
equally important, especially if they want to, work in the workforce, et cetera. I think where the problem comes in is, this constant inundation with, not to pick on Instagram, but like the Instagram worthy life, right? Where
Yeah.
everybody's happy. Why are they always going on vacation and doing this? And that may
Yeah.
or may not be the actual reality, which is setting them up potentially for failure later on.
I agree. I think there's a lot less reality in that universe than reality when you compare the two. It's so much of it. And I mean, I'm on it. I get it. We use it. It's a business tool
Right.
today. I'm not shunning its use whatsoever, but clearly we don't see the whole picture in a lot of what comes across our feeds. And now with AI, it's getting even worse. You don't know what to believe anymore. So it's crazy, but clearly it's not going anywhere, right?
No, definitely not.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell us about your book. It's an Amazon bestseller.
Yeah, financial planning made personal. What did you do today that brought you joy? Basically, over the years, listening to some of the quote unquote pundits out there that talk about, finances and budgeting and all these things. It always irked me because a lot of these folks talk in absolutes, right? Everybody should be doing this or everybody should be doing that. So it's a good mix of personal stories, some advice on how to put yourself on a good path, and then also kind of, pushing back on some of those absolutes, if not all the absolutes, because in the end, financial planning is personal and everybody can't do the same thing and get the same result. It just does not
Right.
work that way.
Well, we'll make sure to put something in the show notes so people can find a link to get it. And where can people find you?
Yeah, so I mean, the easiest place is if they're interested in the book and checking it out and finding me at the same time. If they go to mitlin.us/2 chapters, the word 2 chapters, they'll be able to download 2 chapters of the book, check it out, and then if they want to make the purchase from there or go find it on their library app, they certainly can. And all of my contact information is right there for myself and the firm as well.
Great. Larry, thanks for being here. Really enjoyed our conversation. And it's always good to speak to people that are spreading positivity in the world. And you're doing just that. So thank you for doing that and keep it up.
I appreciate that, Mike. Have a joyful one.
And that'll do it. We're out of here. You guys know where to find us, MikeCPodcast.com. Click that subscribe button. We're also on YouTube. And make sure you subscribe and always check out the new topics that we're going to be bringing because we talk to a lot of different interesting people, and we'll continue to do that. Until next time, thanks, guys. We're out of here.
The Mike C. Podcast.